By Mark Guarino and Mark Berman. Mark Berman, National News reporter. Email bio follow October 5 at 3:38 p.m. Chicago. Jason Van Dyke, a white Chicago police officer, was found guilty of second-degree murder on Friday, nearly 4 years after he shot and killed Laquan McDonald, a black 17-year-old holding a knife. The violent encounter sparked intense demonstrations across the city after authorities released a video recording showing Van Dyke firing 16 shots at McDonald, which eventually led to a sprawling federal investigation and helped force top officials from their jobs. The closely watched trial again highlighted the fraught relationship between the city's police force and its residents, particularly people of color, as well as questions here and nationwide about how officers use deadly force. Van Dyke, who was also found guilty on 16 charges of aggravated battery, one for each shot fired at McDonald, has said he feared for his life. His attorney said that McDonald, 17, would be alive if he had dropped the weapon. Prosecutors argued that McDonald's death was not justified and accused Van Dyke of exaggerating the threat. Jurors found Van Dyke not guilty of official misconduct. Chicago police shooting case goes to jury in a city braced for potential violence. This verdict marks the latest in the seemingly endless shockwave stemming from McDonald's death and the subsequent release of the video, which continued to reverberate across the city and dominated the second term of Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, D. After the footage was released in November 2015, Emanuel ousted his police superintendent, Gary McCarthy, who later said he was the fall guy and is now running for mayor. Voters then dismissed the prosecutor in the case, who waited a year to charge Van Dyke. The Justice Department launched an investigation, concluding in a scathing report last year that the department violates the constitutional rights of residents. A week before Van Dyke's trial began, Emanuel announced he would not run for a third term. Laquan McDonald walks on a road, top LR, and is subsequently shot, bottom R, by police officer Jason Van Dyke, not pictured, in Chicago, in this combination of still images taken from a police vehicle dash camera video shot on October 20, 2014, and released by the Chicago Police on November 24, 2015. Chicago Police Department via Reuters. This trial has drawn particular scrutiny, in part because of how rarely officers are charged for fatally shooting people on duty. Convictions are even less likely to follow, as officers have wide latitude under the law to use deadly force. In recent years, fatal shootings of civilians by police officers in Cincinnati, Milwaukee, North Charleston, S.C., and the Minneapolis area have spurred intense protests, followed by criminal charge, then acquittals or deadlock juries. McDonald's death in October 2014, just weeks after a black teenager was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Mo., did not draw nationwide attention until, 13 months later, the court ordered release of the police dashcam video. Authorities had initially said McDonald lunged at police officers, but the footage showed McDonald slowly walking down the middle of Pulaski Road before hitting the ground when he struck by Van Dyke's bullets. The police department has recommended firing officers for lying about McDonald's death, and 3 current or former officers were indicted last year on charges of conspiring to cover up what happened. After the videos released in November 2015, on the same day Van Dyke was charged with first-degree murder, protesters marched on downtown Chicago streets throughout Emanuel's term. They gathered in front of the mayor's home, on Lakeshore Drive, and even on 2 lanes of the Dan Ryan Expressway to call attention to police reform, and what they charged was a cover-up from City Hall. Chicago police officers have pattern of using excessive force, scathing Justice Department. Report says city officials had fought releasing the tape in court, and it was only released after Emanuel won re-election to a second term, and after Chicago's City Council approved a $5 million settlement with the McDonald family. Last year, the city borrowed $225 million on police-related settlements and judgments, bringing the total to $709 million between 2010 and 2017, according to a report by the Action Center on Race and the Economy. The organization estimates that the borrowing will eventually cost Chicago taxpayers more than $1 billion in interest for the life of the bonds. Tensions surrounding the Van Dyke trial have been high. Protesters have gathered outside the George N. the Leaden Criminal Courthouse every day of the 3-week trial. Some high-rise owners in downtown Chicago have warned residents of potential violence following the verdict. In a joint statement, activist Carl Dix and philosopher Cornel West called Van Dyke's actions illegitimate violence that the trial reinforced. If the court lets Van Dyke walk free, that would be illegitimate violence too, a threat against every black and brown youth in Chicago, they said. Some activists have argued for peaceful protests in the form of an economic boycott. Berman reported from Washington. This story, first published at 3:09 p.m., will be updated. Further reading, The Washington Post's police shootings database. Chicago police have no regard for lives of minorities. Report says Chicago residents think kids growing up there are as likely to be violent crime victims as college graduates. Chicago will make some changes to its police department as a down payment on reform. Chicago releases unprecedented evidence from nearly 100 investigations into police shootings, use of force,